So I got this 14 Chevy Silverado with a 4.3 V6 and it's got an oil leak. It had oil on the skid plate and the front differential and the oil filter housing. Almost as if it was leaking from the cooler lines. But the lines are perfectly dry all the way back. So I put dye in it. And I'm running it at 2,000 RPM with the scan tool commanding it to 2,000. And I'm going to look with the black light to see if I can see any leaks. But it's been running now for about 5 minutes and there's no signs of oil leak yet. When you go on the highway, it consistently drips. Well, I got my microphone on now, so it's probably gonna, you can see oil dripping off of the front differential tube there. I wiped that off. It hasn't dropped yet, but where is it coming from? Can't see any oil up. It's almost like it's leaking out of the casting of the oil pan. Everything's in the way here. I don't want to take the steering gear out, but I might have to take the steering gear and the front diff out to see where this is leaking. It's not coming from the front crank seal. As far as I can tell, it's not coming from the oil cooler lines. This is fun. Well, this is frustrating. Can't tell where it's coming from. Taking the two skid plates off. You can see it's dripping off of this cross tube here, but everything above it looks dry. Brackets, the cooler lines. It's almost like the oil pan has a porosity in it or something. But I can't see in there because of the steering gear and the front diff. And I don't see the dye coming down yet. I put dye in the engine oil and it's still regular color, but there's been, as you can see, 3 drips in the 15 minutes that it was running at fast idle. I had it running at 2,000 RPM. Doesn't look like it's coming from the oil pan seam to the block, and it doesn't look like it's coming from the timing cover seal. I'm going to drop the steering gear and see if I can see in there better. So I took the 4 bolts that hold the steering gear out and just let it drop as far as it would on the shaft here and tie rod ends. And if you look up there on top of the, above the steering gear, there's a wiring harness and it runs over to something in the oil pan on the left hand side. I think an oil level sensor or something. And I think the oil is wicking down that wiring harness and dripping straight down there. But I'm going to see what that sensor is. I'm going to try and get in there with a mirror and look a little closer, but there's got to be some kind of oil level sensor, or I know it's not oil pressure. Oil pressure is at the back of the engine or the front of the engine on this. I can't remember, but it's not down there anyways. Well, I'm confused. Here's a picture of the oil pan assembly from Identifix, but it says it's a 4.3 LV1, LV3 engine. And that shows the sump at the back, but it shows clip number 6 as the oil sensor lead clip. That's on the right-hand side, not the left-hand side. Yet I got a wiring harness running across there, unless I'm not looking at it correctly. I'm going to look closer. So the oil level sensor is on the right-hand side. It towards the bottom center of the camera there. It's not focusing very well. And that looks dry. It looks like it goes in from the inside and there's a clip on the outside. Now that wiring harness that I was looking at up there is the front differential switch wires. And you can see the oil on it. Let me see if I can get it to focus. You see the oil on that tag on the harness, and that just runs up. Where's the oil coming from? It's coming from the right hand or left hand side of the oil pan above the front diff. So I'm running it at 2000 RPM using a scan tool to command it. I've cleaned the oil pan off with brake cleans, dried it all up in that area, and I dropped the left side of the front diff to 18 mil bolts so I can see up there a little better, and we're going to see what happens. And look at that AC compressor bolt. Why would that be seeping oil? I cleaned the area under the pan and I can't see anything. I never looked at that bolt because there's no oil pressure there, or at least it shouldn't be. Definitely that's leaking. I'm going to blow it off. Let's watch it for a few minutes. So now I'm seeing another spot where the oil's running down, right in the center of the screen, coming from the, looks like it's coming out of the housing, the timing cover housing, right dead center of the screen. Maybe that was just the heat expanding the air pressure inside the bolt threads. I don't know, because it's Well, I ran this thing for 20 minutes at 2000 RPM on the hoist here. That corner of the timing cover is dry, but I took it down the highway for about 20 kilometers at highway cruise speeds, and it's leaking from the front seal. You can see it's wet, and it's significant. I cleaned all of these pans off. Look at the oil. But why does it only leak when it's so? Must be when it's over 35 or 3000 RPM, because it does routinely go over 3000 RPM between shifts. I had that pan and everything cleaned off with brake cleans. So we're going to change the timing cover seal. We got to get a new crankshaft bolt with it, and hopefully that fixes it. Whatever, this is driving me crazy. Customer too, I bet. So I cleaned it all off with brake cleans, and started the engine and revved it up to 3500, 3700 RPM, and it leaks. It's definitely coming from the timing cover seal. Yet it didn't look like it before. Wow. Well, there's the harmonic balancer off. And there's the seal. Doesn't feel hard, but it was definitely leaking from that area. And the balancer doesn't look like it's worn. We're going to polish this up with some emery cloth. There's the puller I used to pull the balancer off with the push rod. And after taking the belts off and the bolt out of the center, you got to replace the bolt when you change this. So we're going to pop that seal out of there without scoring the aluminum housing. Usually I'd take a small sheet metal screw and drill into it. but I'm going to try a couple different methods here. This is proving interesting. Drilled a hole in this side and pulled on it with a screw, self-tapping screw, and I managed to get an awl on the outside edge there, and I think I got it free now. We're going to pry it out. So I got the old seal out. I had to pry it in and then pull it out with a screw. Clean the bore. There's the new seal. It looks like a redesigned seal because it's a little bit different shape. No, it's the same. So this is the outside surface. So we're going to try to find an installer that fits around the inside of this, like a piece of pipe. I obviously don't have the right installer. That's the oil side. No garter spring on it, so we don't have to worry about the garter spring popping off. I'm going to put some RTV sealant around the outside of the seal. So this bearing, or it's not a bearing installer, it's a tool from the like a glove. It would be better if I had a bolt to push it in straight, but we'll see. I think I got enough from the swing of hand. So there is a very small thin line on there, but I can't feel it with my fingernail. So I polished it up. I put some Teflon pipe thread sealant on the keyway here, because sometimes the oil wicks down the keyway, but it wasn't leaking from the bolt, it was leaking from the seal area. So we're ready to put this balancer back on, use the old bolt to reinstall it. So here is the official procedure from GM for installing that balancer. Use the original bolt and tighten it to 240 foot-pounds to fully seat the balancer. I've already done that. Remove the used bolt, measure for correctly installed balancer. It should be recessed, the crankshaft snout should be recessed 2.4 to 4.48 millimeters. It is. Install the new crankshaft bolt, which we have here. It's a different design. Tighten the new crankshaft bolt to 110 foot-pounds. Loosen it 360 degrees, tighten it again to 59 foot-pounds, and then a final pass of 200 degrees using an angle meter and holding the flywheel. I'll show you how I hold the flywheel. So I use a hooked bar to pick up one of the torque converter bolts through the bell housing hole here. The factory has a tool that goes into the flywheel teeth, but it requires removal of that shield. This requires a helper to hold it. So I've tightened it to 110. I'm going to back it off and then retighten it to 59 and then mark it so I know how far I've turned it. So I've torqued it to 59 foot-pounds initially, and I've marked it on the left-hand side there at 0, and I'm going to turn it to the second dot on the right-hand side. 90 degrees or 180 degrees is half a turn. 200 degrees is about a half an inch past half a turn. Well, that's tight. I'm using a 4-foot long half-inch power bar and a 4-foot pipe, and I managed to secure that pry bar up against the frame. It's got a hook on it, so that helped. But wow, is that tight. What's wrong with the old ways? So getting these stretch belts on is a challenge. I find the tools don't work. The vacuum pump is easy, but I put a tie wrap around the the AC belt, and we walk it around. Hopefully it goes on. And those belts stretch a lot. I'm going to go back because it's off the AC compressor. Maybe go forward again. on there. I just got to get it lined up on the AC compressor pulley. Technically, you shouldn't turn the engine backwards. Alright, that's on. We put the serpentine belt on, clean all the oil off of everything, and run it again and see if it leaks. So there it is, all back together again. We're going to start it up and run it at 3,500 to 3,700 RPM for a few minutes. It's perfectly dry on the timing cover below the seal area. It should be good to go. So I just drove this truck about 75 kilometers at highway speeds and just came back in the shop and we're looking at it and it's bone dry. So I guess we'll call this one fixed, finally.